All right, what did you guys think? That was a hoot and a holler. All right, without further ado, can we welcome to the stage, put your hands together for Karina Longworth. Woo!
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And thank you so much, Karina, for picking what a fun movie. That was so fun.
I hope you guys liked it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a really hard movie. You can't find it on streaming. It's like $300 for a Blu-ray, so a really rare opportunity to be able to watch it, and especially with you. We're gonna open it up to the audience for some questions and discussion in just a little bit. But whenever we have a guest programmer and we're having them pick their movies, we kind of give them 4 topics where there's a movie that they think needs to be re-examined, their favorite cult film, an all-time favorite, and a childhood favorite. So, Miss Karina, where does At Long Last Love fall in that, and what made you choose it?
You know, I honestly can't remember if this was the one that needed to be re-examined or the cult film.
It kind of fits in both.
Yeah, and Arizona Dream also fits in both.
Definitely.
You know, but I think both of them are films that are really difficult to see, and movies that have just because of that have kind of like fallen into the dustbin of history.
Definitely has. Definitely has. Another thing that so Peter Bogdanovich, he's very referential while staying very himself too. And in one of your recent articles, I saw you talk about how he's kind of a bridge to from old Hollywood to new Hollywood. So one thing I was kind of thinking was, does this movie and him in particular tie into the new "that old man is still alive" aspect of your podcast?
Well, yeah. If anybody has listened to any of the episodes, thank you. Peter Bogdanovich, before he was a film director, he and his wife Polly Platt, basically what they did for a living was they interviewed the directors of the previous generation or the previous couple of generations, people like Hitchcock, John Ford, Howard Hawks, and they were obsessed with these movies of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 20s and 10s. And they wanted to see as many of them as they could and meet the filmmakers and learn everything they could from them. And so in a lot of these episodes, I'm quoting interviews that Bogdanovich did. And then, he goes on and he starts making films like The Last Picture Show and Paper Moon that are, like, because of the time period and because they're so distinctive as personal films, are kind of lumped together as the new Hollywood. But he was never really comfortable amongst people like Spielberg or Scorsese, or Warren Beatty. I mean, these were people that he socialized with to some extent, but he wasn't really doing the same thing. He was always inspired by these movies, mostly of the 1930s, and you see that obviously here. I mean, I always like if I'm trying to get somebody to care about this specific movie, I always say that it's sort of a combination of a Fred and Ginger musical and then like a screwball comedy of the 1930s. If all of the alcohol that you see people drinking in those movies actually had the effect that much alcohol would have.
Absolutely. I mean, it's even fun. You can see like Philadelphia Story, Designed for Living, like all of these different films. That's like what I love about him so much, is that you just see how much he loves what he's doing in his work. But for that part of your podcast has been really exciting for me to listen to. And what kind of inspired you to go on that journey of this old man is still alive?
So it's actually very difficult for me to commit to an idea for a season because it's so much work.
Yeah.
And I have to know that it's going to be worth it, in that there's going to be many movies that I'm excited to watch. And so it took me a really long time to settle on an idea after my last season ended in the fall of 2023. And the way this one came together, it was, actually a process. It took many years. I think it was 2022 that I saw an Otto Preminger film called Such Good Friends, which is sort of a very acidic sex comedy from the 1970s. And then in the summer of 2023, I was in Paris when the Cinémathèque Française was doing a full Vincent Minnelli retrospective. And so because I considered myself a really big Vincent Minnelli fan, I specifically went to see the movies that I hadn't seen. And one of them was his 1962 remake of Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And that film just really blew me away. And I couldn't believe that as a Minnelli fan, I'd never even heard of it, let alone seen it. And I just felt like I had to find out everything about how it was made and share that. And then this past summer, I revisited The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, the John Ford film, which is kind of the ultimate old man film. I mean, it's
Yes.
it's about these old men kind of, evaluating what legacy is and, truth versus fiction and how everything kind of gets muddled at the end of somebody's life. And that movie was made and released the same year as Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. So those three things together kind of made me start thinking about this idea of these guys, these directors who got their starts in the first decades of Hollywood, really, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, who were still making movies in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and how their movies changed, either because they wanted to change or because the industry was changing, the culture was changing, or some combination.
Yeah, what's kind of cool is that all of the directors that you've talked about, they're all directors that really swing big. Like, they're not just doing the same thing that they've always done. Like, in their continuing body of work, they're trying new things, and it's really cool to see. So I think it's really cool that you're bringing that to a wider audience for sure.
Thank you.
Of course. Now we're gonna answer some questions, so raise your hands. Yes?
Hi, my name is Lowell Reynolds, not spelled like Burt Reynolds, of course, but I really enjoyed this movie. Sybil, I forgot how to pronounce her name.
Sybil Shepherd?
Sybil Shepherd, yeah, thank you. And Madeline Kahn, they're so beautiful and so talented. And this movie felt like being on a date. It felt like very intimate. And what I noticed is this is from the director of What's Up, Doc. Both those movies have the song "You're the Top, You're the Bottom," or "I'm the Bottom, You're the Top." That came out wrong. But why do you think he loved that song so much that he put it in two of his movies?
This movie is very specifically inspired by the songs of Cole Porter, and the story that I've heard is that Sybil, actually, who was dating Bogdanovich for many years, she gave him kind of like an illustrated compendium of Cole Porter lyrics, and
So cool.
as a gift, and that inspired them to make this film. And so I don't think it mattered to him that he had already used the song in another movie. I think he was really inspired to figure out a way to build a narrative around these songs for this film.
Definitely. Right there in the back with the, yeah.
So I'm a really big Bogdanovich fan, so it was really incredible to see this. But I was kind of curious because I know there's that story where when it initially came out, it was hated because the cuts that wasn't really Bogdanovich, just kind of edited to try to appease after some failed test screenings, and then a Cole Porter fan basically edited I'm assuming this version of the film. I'm just curious, do you know why, what was cut out to possibly make it so derided when it came out? Because it was literally, I saw an article, they listed the top 10 worst films of all time, and it's just crazy to see now, because it's a really great film.
I'm glad you think so. Yeah. So I couldn't tell you specifically what scenes are in this that were not in the theatrical version. I've heard a couple of different stories about how this version came together, but I hadn't heard that it was specifically a Cole Porter fan. I've heard that Bogdanovich had seen a version of it on television that he recognized had material in it that was not in the theatrical release. And then at that point, he started trying to figure out where that material was. And then ultimately, it was tracked down so that he could put together this director's cut, which I actually went to a screening that he introduced on the Fox lot in either 2012 or 2013. And then shortly after that, they put out a Blu-ray, which nobody bought. So that's why that Blu-ray is now, $200 on eBay. So if it ever gets released in physical media again, buy it so that it doesn't go out of print again, please.
Ricky?
This is my first time watching this, and I'm kind of confused because I was under the impression the way it was set up, it felt like I was going to watch Plan 9 from Outer Space. Because he's he apologized, on a newspaper, and I was like, it can't be that bad. It really isn't, but I'm wondering, when directors swing and they miss, is this really when they feel the gut punch of congratulations, all the critics in America hate your film. Like, was it really that bad to the point where he's just, he never wants to talk about it ever again? Like, is it like what was the?
No, I mean, I don't think it was that he never wanted to talk about this film ever again. I think he was wounded because this was such a labor of love for him, and it was something that he made with the woman he was in love with, Sybil Shepherd, as kind of a love letter to her, a love letter to the things that they were in love with together. And it was his second flop in a row starring her after Daisy Miller, which is, I think Sybil's performance is much better in this film than it is in Daisy Miller. In Daisy Miller, she's kind of doing like a very big, broad American caricature, and it's a movie about like an American in Europe. And it just, I think I understand what they were going for in Daisy Miller, but nobody did when the film was released in the 70s. And then this movie comes out afterwards, and it's even more ambitious, and it's trying something that's even more uncool at the time. There is this wave of 70s movies that are paying tribute to the 1930s, like Young Frankenstein. Stanley Donen made a movie called Lucky Lady with Burt Reynolds again, and Gene Hackman and Liza Minnelli. There's another one that I was thinking of that I can't remember right now. But like this movie was not what people were expecting from Bogdanovich, and it was really not what the audience wanted in 1975, regardless of what cut was being put out, And so I think that he just felt he felt really hurt by the reaction, and he wasn't feeling defiant. He was feeling like, I kind of want my career back. Instead, the next movie he made is a movie I really love called Nickelodeon, which is about the silent era, again starring Burt Reynolds. And that movie was also a big flop, and he had to sort of, retreat at that point.
I just think they weren't ready for it, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I also like Bogdanovich was such a big pop culture figure at this time. He would guest host The Tonight Show. He and Sybil were on magazine covers just looking beautiful and impossibly in love. And there was a real backlash to them.
Definitely. Right here?
Yes, I wanted to first say I'm a huge fan of your podcast.
Thank you.
And have since been listening for about 12 years. Absolutely love it.
Well, it's only been out for 11 years, so.
A few seasons ago, you did a really fascinating season about Polly Platt. And I was just curious what your favorite movie of the Bogdanovich and Platt films, and also your favorite films when they were separated afterwards.
So of their collaborations, I love them all. I guess probably The Last Picture Show is just, I think it's probably my favorite of the 4 films they made together, but it's a close tie really between that and, depending on the day, sometimes it's What's Up Doc, sometimes it's Paper Moon. Of Polly's movies that she made without Peter, there's also a lot of great ones. I really think the movie that she wrote that Louis Malle directed, Pretty Baby, is fascinating. Her production design for the Barbra Streisand version of A Star Is Born is incredible. But probably my favorite movie that Polly was involved with, Peter or no, is Broadcast News.
Yes, ma'am. Right here?
Hi, also longtime fan. I really loved in particular your Sex in the 80s and 90s seasons. And I'm wondering from like an organizational point of view, like how do you keep such a large timeline in track? And how do you know when the story is getting too big and refocus it? Because you covered so much ground throughout those 2 seasons.
I don't know it's getting too big until I realize that I've been working for many months without a break, I guess. I'm a really big believer that stories should be told chronologically, which is why I'm not allowed to write television, because in television they want everything to have like a framing device. But I just think it's like a really good idea to start at the beginning and then tell the story and end at the end. I think that's just kind of the best way to deliver, especially historical information. So for me, I just, in terms of keeping stuff together, even with the season I'm doing right now, The Old Man Is Still Alive, to some extent there's a little bit of backtracking because each episode is about a director, and so you go back to, wherever they started or wherever their movie started to get weird. But starting with the person I started the season with Frank Capra, who's the person who stopped making movies earliest. And then the last director is John Huston, who stopped making movies latest.
Right here?
Hi. I was listening to The Old Man is Dead and realizing that Peter Bogdanovich has such a large span of time between his last couple of movies, the last one being like his penultimate came out in '93 and then the 2014 one. Do you think there's echoes of his work echoing that Old Man is still alive, or did the flops just nobody wanted to work with him anymore?
I don't think that's actually true with Bogdanovich. There were movies between '93 and the 2000s. I'm sorry. Was that the question? Okay, I'm sorry. Because I know that Cat's Meow came out around 2000, and there were other films in between. But he did have a very difficult time getting movies made the last couple decades of his life. I mean, I know that he had a script about George Gershwin that he was trying to get made when he died.
I mean, and we're even seeing that now with like John Waters not being able to find funding for his movie. I think you talked about it really well with Francis Ford Coppola and Megalopolis, and just seeing those like older directors who are absolute legends that are just having a harder time kind of.
Or when
putting their work out there.
when they do get the money and put something together and release it, like say Michael Mann's Ferrari, which is a movie I really loved. I mean, it feels like distributors don't really get behind it, and then it doesn't find the audience, and then it's sort of like, what is the chicken and what is the egg? It's like, is the audience not going to see it because an old man made it, or is the distributors, do they not have faith, or is the movie just kind of too interesting for our current marketplace?
Yeah, definitely. All the way in the back? Yes.
Hi, I loved this. I thought it was a masterpiece.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, what did you? I'd like to hear what your thoughts on the ending, where both of the men are looking at the other person and going, "It never looked more lovely," and how you think it relates to the overall theme of the film.
Well, I mean, it's slightly ambiguous, but I mean, I think that there's this sense, especially with the, returning to the motif of the music box, and this, like in at the beginning of the film with the music box, the partners switch, and it's simple. And then at the end with the music box, like the women are sort of frozen. They don't quite get back together with the men. And so I think you could read it as like, maybe it's in stasis. Maybe they're just gonna keep swapping forever. Or maybe, the men are looking at the other woman, but they are dancing with the person they're supposed to be dancing with.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a lot of the 30s movies where they just kind of end. And it's just kind of like...
Well, I also think this movie is specifically referencing the end of The Awful Truth,
Yes.
Which is a movie that I know Bogdanovich was a fan of. And that movie, because of the production code, which couldn't show two people, like it couldn't end with just like two people having sex, there is this visual motif of a cuckoo clock where, I can't remember what kind of, I assume it's a bird, but I can't remember it. Like it kind of like crawls out of the clock and then ultimately like goes into another room at the end, and that's a metaphor for like the Cary Grant and Irene Dunn getting together.
One of the cutest endings of all time. Also, absolutely love it. Do we have all the way back there?
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed this. I would not have watched it otherwise, so thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
I'm a big fan of, I've seen a lot of films that pay homage to like 1930s and 1940s films and are inspired by it, but a lot of the times you'll watch them and you'll be like, oh, they wouldn't have done a shot like that back then. And I feel like when watching this, it felt like such an accurate representation of the staging and shot composition and even just how it treats its characters in the film. And I'm wondering if you think that Bogdanovich's success with that is maybe why the film didn't connect with audiences of the 70s. Were they expecting more of like an updated kind of twist on the genre as opposed to such sort of an accurate representation of it?
I mean, you could say that because, something like Young Frankenstein, which was more of a direct spoof, was a success. But I just think that there was a lot of things stacked against this movie when it was released in 1975, and a lot of it had to do with bad press about Peter and Sybil. The movie got terrible reviews. There was a very long, withering profile of the making of the movie published in Rolling Stone, written by Julia Cameron, who would soon thereafter marry Martin Scorsese. There was just this sense that like both Hollywood and the media kind of had their knives out. And some of it was like, a backlash because Peter had been very successful very quickly.
Right here?
She said some withering things, yeah. But I mean, I don't know that she was, I don't think she could be impartial and, think of it as a movie, because it is such a love letter to the woman her husband left her for. But I don't know if you guys noticed, her daughters are in the movie. In the scene where they have kind of the musical number in the department store bathroom, they're the two little girls standing on the vanity watching.
That's so cute. Right here in the middle?
Hi. Okay, so this is a love letter to Sybil Shepherd. It's also a letter to her nipples. That being said, the fashion in this movie is crazy. It is very 1930s, but it also manages to feel 70s. And that's partially because there was a lot of crossover between the trends of those eras. That being said, what do you think of the fashion? Do you have any fun little trivia?
I don't really have any trivia. I do know that, I can't remember who it was, but one of Bogdanovich's sort of old Hollywood friends was like, Peter, you have to stop dressing Sybil in white. She looks like a whale. Watching this movie this time, I was actually struck by how beautifully voluptuous all of the women are, which went against the trend of the 1970s, which was to be very, very thin. And so, that's just one other element of this film where Peter was doing what he found beautiful, what he found romantic, and it was just not for 1975.
That dress at the beginning with the hood. Thank God. Wow. Right here?
I came tonight because this is one of the few movies with Madeline Kahn that I hadn't seen and hadn't been able to find anywhere. And I love her singing voice. How was she affected by the bad press after all this?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
I think she was fine. Probably.
I mean, she unfortunately, tragically, she died very young, and so I don't think we know as much about how she felt about things as we'd like to.
Definitely. She's great in this, though. Also, that was one thing where all the reviews I was reading were talking about how bad the singing was. And I didn't think it was that bad. I was kind of like, oh.
Well, also another thing to keep in mind is that they were singing live.
Yeah, definitely.
So they didn't perfect these tracks. And it was a real technical feat in the 70s because this singing live, making a musical was something that they used to do in 1932. They had stopped doing it by, 1945 for sure. So by 1975, this was a real archaic process. And, I know I just recently read a thing where Burt Reynolds was complaining about how difficult it was and how, if anybody flubbed a line or missed a dance step or looked, in the wrong direction, they'd have to start completely over again.
Terrible. Right here?
Oh, hi, ma'am. I've been enjoying the latest series of Old Man Still Alive. Which directors almost made the selection?
That's a really good question. Robert Wise. I ultimately just decided that I don't like his late films enough. But he was on the last person to get cut. And I thought about Anthony Mann, but his movies never really got weird. And then there's a lot of other people who I considered, but it just didn't seem like maybe they worked deep enough into the 60s, or they didn't really have a kind of, it didn't feel like their work was significantly affected by the times changing enough.
Right here?
If you were gonna put a current director into that series, who would it be?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I wonder if there's anybody, I wonder who is still working, who's been working the longest. I'd have to, kind of do some math on that, but maybe. I think that his late movies, each one is sort of interesting in its own way, sometimes not for the best reasons. I do think that what Scorsese has been doing with his last 2 or 3 movies is, it really feels like he's aware that time is running out and he's kind of trying to put everything into every movie. I think for better, other people seem to think for worse.
All right, we're gonna take a couple more. Let's see, right here in the middle, green sweater.
Hi. I have a question about the new season of You Must Remember This. And in your research, did you ever find out what Fritz Lang's martini recipe was?
You know, I didn't. I've read so many accounts of people saying, "Oh, Fritz, he makes the best martinis," but did not find out what made them so great. But you know, maybe it's just this thing of like he was such great company that when you were having a martini made by Fritz, you just felt like you had the best night, and it was the most delicious martini you ever had. I will tell you though that in my household, we have started putting 1 drop of absinthe in martinis. This is inspired by Somerset Maugham's The Razor's Edge. There's a portion in that book where he explains that if you put just a splash of absinthe, you can turn a workaday martini into the nectar of the gods. I recommend it.
I believe it. Right here.
I'm a library person. I read your bibliography piece for fun.
Thank you.
That's good. So since I'm really into research, because it's what I do, what was the most difficult season to research, and what difficulties did you come across?
The seasons that I researched in 2020 were difficult because I couldn't go anywhere. So that the Gossip Girl season, Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, that I actually chose that season because I knew I could do so much on newspapers.com, and I could access that online. The current season is really challenging because to some extent, the themes are the same from episode to episode, but anytime you have to move from one subject to the next week to week, it's kind of like starting from scratch. And some of these directors, like Henry Hathaway, which is coming up, and Stanley Donen, the biographies available about them are not as in-depth as I would like them to be, and so then I have to, really do a lot of primary research.
All right, let's do one more. Right there in the back middle.
Thank you. Okay. Love you, Karina. Keep doing your accents, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
I need them. I thought the singing in this film was fantastic, actually. I was surprised that Sybil could sing.
She's put out like 3 or 4 albums.
But, Giulio, where did he find that guy?
So he was an Italian opera singer. He was actually in Bogdanovich's previous film, Daisy Miller. I think he was looking for a handsome Italian man to be in Daisy Miller, and he cast this man. And then I think knowing that he had a handsome Italian opera singer in his back pocket inspired the creation of this character.
All right, so for the next picks that you have some amazing pre-recorded intros for all of them. But can you give a little sneak peek on what made you choose Arizona Dream, my personal favorite, Trouble in Paradise, and The Wizard of Oz?
So The Wizard of Oz is my childhood favorite pick. That's a film that for a long time, it was the only movie that I watched at home. My parents would take me to see the re-releases of every Disney animated film from the time I was about 3. But when we first got a VCR, we only had 1 tape, and it was a copy of The Wizard of Oz that my grandfather had taped because he bought a VCR first, and it included all the commercials. So I watched The Wizard of Oz with these commercials of Billy Crystal saying, "You look marvelous," to a can of Diet Pepsi. So for me, that for a long time, that was part of the movie. But it's, maybe the movie I've seen more than any other movie. And it, in my video intro, if you guys come to watch it, I talk about how it imprinted on me. Trouble in Paradise is simply the greatest romantic comedy ever made.
Yes.
And also, Herbert Marshall is so sexy and must be recuperated as one of our great idols. And Kay Francis is just my absolute fave. And Arizona Dream is, I said it could be a rediscovery, it could be a cult film. I saw the version that we're going to show, which is the 144-minute director's cut, in Paris this past summer, and it's like nothing you've ever seen. I think it has not. There's this beautiful 4K restoration of it, and I think it has not really shown here because it's also per capita the most canceled movie of all time. It's like, it stars Johnny Depp, Vincent Gallo. It's directed by a Serbian nationalist who has a weird commune. Faye Dunaway, maybe not canceled, certainly ripe for critique. Same with Jerry Lewis. But I really feel like there's something very special there. And Lily Taylor gives the most incredible performance in it. I mean, if there's any reason to watch Arizona Dream, it's like imagining this alternate universe where the biggest stars that came out of the 90s, the biggest movie stars were Lily Taylor and Vincent Gallo.
That one of her with I can't remember what it's called, Weird Al's instrument.
The accordion.
The accordion. It's so good. That part is so good. It is funny whenever we post about it. Someone's like, Vincent Gallo? Johnny Depp? I'm like, well, yeah, okay. I'll do one more from the audience just in case. Let's see. Right in the back, blue shirt. Yeah,
I was just curious, like, because with all these old directors, a lot of times they have these unrealized projects that, like, unfortunately never get to make. Like, it's rare for like a Megalopolis to be made. Out of all the old man directors, what's like the one film that they never got to make that you really wish like that got made?
So I was actually just reading about George Cukor. There was a long gap between his biggest hit, which was My Fair Lady in 1964, and his next film, which came out in 1969. And during that time, he was trying to make two movies, which I wish he had made. One was about 19th century spiritualists, and the other one was about Victoria Woodhull, who was also 19th century feminist who ran for president. And I read this interview with him. This is like a sneak peek of that episode. I read this interview with him where somebody asked him, like, oh, did you think about casting Katharine Hepburn in that part? And he was like, well, no, not really, because she's too intelligent, and Victoria did a lot of fucking. So.
And then we'll just do the one behind you, yeah.
I need a supplementary. This gave me such Ishtar vibes. So for a moment like this, what about it that maybe makes it not so loved when it comes out, but then like 20, 30, 50 down the line becomes like such a gem? Why do you feel like it's become a gem over time?
Well, I mean, in the case of both Ishtar and this, I mean, I think the media really had it out for the productions. I mean, both were kind of expensive and ambitious. In the case of Ishtar too, I think people wanted to take Elaine May down a peg, and they wanted to take Warren Beatty down a peg. But I think, hopefully you guys appreciated this film tonight. I think it's easier to appreciate now than it was in 1975 because of the fact that there was just so much pressure for Bogdanovich to have a hit at that time. And now, he has passed on. It doesn't need to make any money. It just needs to, entertain us. And I find it extremely entertaining.
Hopefully we'll be able to play his Squirrels to the Nuts.
Oh yeah, I was sick when it showed in Los Angeles a few weeks ago, so I'm dying to see it.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so you guys, we have Wizard of Oz tomorrow and Monday. Arizona Dream is Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Trouble in Paradise is going to be on Thursday. Don't miss any of them. Karina has some wonderful introductions filmed. And then let's just remember to tune in to You Must Remember This for this new season. Woo! And give one final huge round of applause for Miss Karina Longworth.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.